In the final years of World War II, as cities burned and armies clashed across continents, a silent race unfolded behind laboratory doors and reinforced bunker walls. It was a race not for territory or glory, but for a single weapon, one that promised the power to rewrite the fate of nations. A weapon capable of ending the war in an instant, or extending it into unthinkable darkness. For Adolf Hitler and the Nazi leadership, the atomic bomb was more than a scientific goal. It was a last hope, an obsession, and, at times, a delusion. Whispers of miracle weapons spread through Germany as defeat loomed. Propaganda claimed that revolutionary technologies were being developed in secret, technologies that would turn the tide when everything else had failed. But behind these grand promises lay a different reality. The road to nuclear power was complex, fragile, and unforgiving. It demanded precision, collaboration, resources, and time. Four things the collapsing Third Reich could no longer afford. Hidden away in scattered laboratories, a handful of German physicists struggled against shortages, political paranoia, sabotage fears, and scientific contradictions. Some were brilliant, others unwilling, and a few simply too late. This is the story of why Hitler never reached the atomic bomb, not because he lacked the ambition, but because the world around him, and the decisions he made, ensured he would never grasp it. It is a tale of missed opportunities, scientific miscalculations, political chaos, and the thin line between possibility and impossibility in the shadow of global war. Sometimes history turns on decisions that seem small in the moment, yet shape the fate of nations. In the late 1930s and early 1940s, Germany possessed some of the greatest scientific minds on Earth. It had industry, resources, and an aggressive leadership that dreamed of domination. And yet, despite all this power, the Third Reich failed to achieve one thing that could have changed the entire course of the war: a nuclear weapon. In 1939, the discovery of nuclear fission spread through the scientific world like a silent shockwave. It was clear to many physicists that splitting the atom might unlock unimaginable energy. For some, it was a promise of progress. For others, a warning. And in a world that was rapidly preparing for war, it was also a potential weapon, one whose destructive power could dwarf anything ever seen before. Germany seemed to have every advantage. Werner Heisenberg, one of the fathers of quantum mechanics, was there. Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann had already discovered fission. The foundations of nuclear physics had been laid in German laboratories. To many observers, it seemed inevitable that the Germans would be the first to build an atomic bomb. Yet the story that followed was not one of triumph, but of confusion, miscalculations, political blindness, and a race slowly suffocated by the very system that created it. When the German nuclear effort began, it did not look anything like the Manhattan Project. There were no vast factories, no secret cities in the desert, no thousands of engineers working in shifts. The leaders of the Reich simply did not believe such a scale was necessary. They imagined that a small group of brilliant scientists could work quietly in laboratories and deliver a miracle weapon when needed. They had no idea that building an atomic bomb required industrial infrastructure as large as entire towns and resources measured in mountains, not kilograms. While the United States was assembling enormous facilities in Tennessee, Washington, and New Mexico, the German effort limped forward with shortages of almost everything. Even basic materials were hard to obtain. The scientists developing the reactor didn't have enough high-purity graphite, so they relied heavily on an alternative, heavy water. But the only source of heavy water in Europe was in Norway, and the Allies knew it. In one of the most dramatic sabotage missions of the war, Norwegian commandos destroyed the facility, eliminating Germany's supply. Without heavy water, the German reactor was crippled before it even began. But the real blow to the German program had happened much earlier, before the war, even before Hitler had fully consolidated power. The regime's anti-Jewish laws and deadly fanaticism forced many of the world's brightest physicists to flee. Albert Einstein, Enrico Fermi, Edward Teller, Hans Bethe. These were not just talented scientists, they were visionaries, the exact minds needed to turn theory into reality. Many of them would later become key architects of the Manhattan Project. Germany did not lose a race. It chased away the runners who could have won it. Inside Germany, the scientists who remained fought a different kind of battle, a battle with uncertainty. Heisenberg himself misunderstood one of the most crucial calculations in the entire process. His early estimates for the amount of uranium needed for a bomb were off by orders of magnitude. He believed that a nuclear weapon would require tons of material, an impossibly large amount for a nation at war. In reality, the amount needed was small enough to fit into a handful of metal spheres. Heisenberg wasn't incompetent. The science was simply young, the data incomplete, and the pressure enormous. But this single miscalculation created a quiet doom for the program. If the lead physicist did not truly believe a bomb was feasible, how could the project gain momentum? As the war dragged on, Germany's problems only multiplied. The country that once boasted precision industry now struggled to produce even the basics. Allied bombers shredded factories. Supply lines collapsed. Skilled workers were drafted into the army or killed. Machines, tools, chemicals, even electricity itself became unreliable. Imagine trying to build a nuclear reactor in a city where air raid sirens interrupted experiments every night, where lights flickered, where trains never arrived on time, and where even the scientists feared the political police more than the enemy bombers. Within this chaos, the nuclear program remained fractured, underfunded, and poorly organized. Different groups competed for attention and resources. Some pushed for reactors, others for theoretical work. No unified vision existed. No one in power truly understood what was needed. And the man at the top, Adolf Hitler, showed little interest in a weapon that required years of work. He wanted results now. He wanted rockets, jets, tank divisions, anything that could win battles within weeks, not years. A nuclear program did not fit his idea of a decisive weapon. By the final years of the war, the once promising German effort had deteriorated into scattered experiments in underground bunkers and rural laboratories. American forces advancing across Europe found reactors that were half-built, notes that hinted at progress but lacked direction, and scientists who were surprised that their work had drawn so much attention. When the Allies captured Heisenberg and other German physicists and held them in a secret house in England, they listened as these men reacted to the news of Hiroshima. The recordings revealed surprise, even disbelief. The Germans had not merely failed to build a bomb, they had failed to understand how close the Americans truly were. The truth was simple: Germany never came close. Not because it lacked intelligence. Not because the idea was impossible. But because the Third Reich was built on fear, division, and ideology, conditions where science cannot thrive. Bombs can be built quickly. Laboratories cannot. And a nuclear weapon requires a nation that can solve its problems rationally, organize vast resources, and trust its best minds. Nazi Germany could do none of those things. In the end, the failure of the German atomic project was not a miracle or a twist of fate. It was the inevitable result of a system that sabotaged itself at every step, driving out its brightest thinkers, starving its scientists of resources, misunderstanding the scale of the challenge, and collapsing under the weight of its own ambitions. And perhaps, in a dark and silent way, the world was fortunate. Had Germany combined its early scientific dominance with the industrial discipline needed for a nuclear program, history might have taken a far more catastrophic turn. But instead, the bomb was born elsewhere, and the race that could have rewritten the 20th century ended before it truly began.